Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Brittany and I talk about books on this channel, and today I'm going to do another full plot summary book. I will be talking to you about The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. This, I believe, is considered a classic. I have no idea I'm pretty sure it's considered a classic. I'm assuming so. This is my first time, after reading this book, was my first time reading this book through. I think typically people or children read this book in school, I believe. I was never privy to that or being enforced to do that. So I read the book, and as an adult reading this the first time through, it's kind of like, oh, okay, interesting. We'll kind of get into all the details of everything that happened in the book. So we're gonna get into today's video. It might be a little bit longer than normal, so if you want to listen to me yap for close to an hour, let's get started. So The Boy in the Striped Pajamas is situated about a main character named Bruno. Bruno one day adventures to his room to find his maid, or the maid that lives in his house, Maria, packing up his items. At first, he's kind of upset that she is touching his belongings, especially because she might go to the back of his closet and touch or disturb some of his precious items that he quotes as nobody else's business. He is trying to be respectful to Maria. His mother always told Bruno that she needs to speak with her kindly, even though father doesn't speak with her with Bruno's father doesn't speak to Maria kindly, and he's trying to subdue his anger that she's touching his stuff, and he's like, "What are you doing with my items?" And before Maria can actually formulate a response, his mother is in the doorway, kind of instructing Bruno to come downstairs because she needs to speak to him. As they make their way downstairs, Bruno's mother informs him that they are moving due to Bruno's father's job. He has work and they're leaving Berlin. To give you a little bit of a more idea of this house that they live in Berlin. The Berlin house is 5 stories. There's a huge banister that Bruno likes to slide down off of, and there's so many places to explore and things to discover in this house. One of the reoccurring things that Bruno mentions is that father's office is off limits, no exceptions. It's off limits to the children. There's no playing, there's no going in there. And they also live in this community in Berlin where it fosters community. Like, there's children who are playing, it's lively, he has friends, and so all that's happening. And Bruno's having this conversation about moving, and he's a little bit confused and a little bit flustered. One, that he is no longer going to be going to school, so his friends Martin, Carl, and Daniel, they're supposed to be best friends forever, and his mother's just like, you'll make new friends, essentially. 2, he doesn't really understand what his father does for work. It's like, I'm not really sure what his occupation is to begin with, and he makes a statement of, like, are we moving a mile away? And his mother's like, yes, we're moving much, much more than just a mile away from this Berlin home. After they move into a new house. And this house, in Bruno's mind, is the complete opposite of the Berlin home. 1, it's 3 stories and is only 1 bathroom. The servants sleep in the basement, and the parents, they have their room on the top floor. This house is like desolate, and in Bruno's idea, he feels as though this is a home where happiness cannot reside. Like, happiness feels like it has been stripped away from all of like the nooks and crannies in this house, and he is very much so dissatisfied with this move. Bruno takes it upon himself to have a conversation with his mother, and he tells her point blank, like, I think you've made a bad decision. I think we should move back to the Berlin home, and I understand if we have to stay here for like 1 night because we made this long journey, but tomorrow we need to pack up all of our stuff and we need to move back. His mother at first is trying to be like understanding with her son and like this new change, and shortly after she kind of gets frustrated with him and is just like, go to your room, help Maria unpack. We're staying. We're not moving. And Bruno then goes to his room and he's trying to help Maria unpack, and there is a window in his room. And this window is a little bit different than the windows in Berlin. In just as a caveat, in his house in Berlin on the fifth story, there was a window where he could see all of Berlin. And this window in this room is facing the back of the house, and he walks up to the window. What he sees outside makes him feel cold and unsafe, is what he states. The next part of the book, we are introduced to Gretel. Gretel is the hopeless case. She has been named that by her brother Bruno. He makes multiple statements that she's a hopeless case and the doctors just don't know what to do with her. And he just calls her hopeless. It seems like such a childlike insult. And Gretel is 3 years older than him, and she kind of bosses him around. She perturbs him, she bothers him, they do the same thing back and forth. Gretel's at the stage where she is 12 years old and her room are filled with dolls with like those kind of like low-key creepy eyes that no matter where you are in the room, it looks like the doll is staring at you. Yeah, she has one of those. And her room actually faces kind of like the side of the house where there is a wooded area, a forest area. Bruno states that it could be pretty if somebody like kind of upkept it. Gretel has walked into Bruno's room. Bruno and Gretel are having this moment where even though they kind of bicker and fight against each other a lot, they're having this moment where they're coming to like an allegiance that they don't like being here and they want to go back to Berlin. And so they're having this conversation, and one of the comments that came up in Bruno's conversation that he was having with his mother about moving back to Berlin is the statement, the foreseeable future. And Bruno's like, what does the foreseeable future mean? Like, what does that even mean? And Gretel basically explains to him that foreseeable future means like 3 weeks. Like, we're going to be here for like max 3 weeks. Bruno also gets the information that this house is called Outwith, or we'll just call OW. And Bruno makes the statement that the children here don't look friendly. Gretel at this statement is completely transfixed. Like, what children are you talking about? I haven't seen any children. We've been here. I haven't seen anybody to play with. No children. And Bruno walks his sister over to his window and she peers out and she sees exactly what he's talking about. What did they see through the window? Again, Bruno's window faced the backyard, and right behind their house there was a large garden filled with flowers, and there is also a bench, like a wooden bench. Typically the wooden bench would face away from the garden, but this time the bench was faced towards the house or towards the garden, and on the bench there was a plaque. However, the children at this vantage point could not see what the plaque said. However, far back in the distance, if they looked beyond the garden and beyond the bench, they saw in the distance a fence, a wire fence that was taller than the house and that had barbed wire woven around the top. And they're trying to figure out who these people are, but the children or the people behind the fence weren't just children. There were small and big boys. There were fathers and grandfathers behind the fence. It seemed like there were soldiers yelling at the men and children. And they all formed like kind of a chain gang, and they were pushing wheelbarrows. Gretel and Bruno are seeing this more specifically in the vantage point of Bruno, and they're trying to decipher what they're trying to see. What is this? Gretel comes up with the consensus that they must be in the countryside. That's why there's so much land, and that's why there are not that many children to play with. And Bruno refutes this idea. He states that then where are the animals? Where are the greenery? Because behind the fence on the ground is nothing but just sand. It's no grass, just sand. And Gretel eventually comes to consensus that he must be right, that this isn't the farmland, but they're not really quite sure what this is. The last thing Gretel says in this part is she makes a statement about the appearance of the children and the men behind this fence and how dirty and bewildered they look. She makes a statement also that she takes a bath every morning and they look like they haven't taken a bath in so long, and that's kind of strange and abnormal to her. She eventually leaves, goes back to her room, trying to grapple with what it is that she is seeing. And Bruno goes back to the window, staring out, and just states how extraordinary before turning away. So prior to moving to this new home, on their journey to this new home, Bruno's father did not travel with them. He didn't come, he wasn't there on their journey. And before they're leaving, his mother made a comment stating that we should have never let the fury come to dinner. Some people and their determination to get ahead. After they've packed up, all of the servants who resided in the Berlin house also came with them to their new house, and they're at the train station, and Bruno remembers seeing so many people about to get on the train, and there were soldiers marching back and forth. Him and his family were in like a different cart on a different train, and their, I guess, cart that they were in, their train wagon, is that the correct term, that they were in was very spacious and had room, and the other people who were waiting for a train looked like they were like kind of cramming and packing into this very condensed area. He made the statement that he really wanted to basically like scream out and tell the people that there's plenty of room in his wagon and that they can come and sit here, but he didn't want to make his mother upset, so he didn't say anything. However, once the train started moving, he realized that they were both moving in the same direction and they were going eastward. At this, Bruno eventually hears his father downstairs. At first, he's a little bit upset because typically his father would come and like say hello to him. But he hears his father downstairs and he peers down the banister in the foyer area, I presume. And his father is speaking to several soldiers. There are several soldiers around him that are trying to gain his attention, and they're just talking. And Bruno's only picking up bits and pieces of what these soldiers are trying to say. His father, as in terms of characteristic of appearance, he's a very decorated. His uniform is very crisp compared to the other soldiers. He has a lot of regalia and medals on him that kind of symbolize a level of stature and status. And Bruno is kind of transfixed with, who are these people in my house? What is going on? Eventually, after the soldiers are rambling, trying to get Bruno's father's attention, he kind of interrupts them and basically stating, I need to settle in. A fresh new beginning will start tomorrow, whatsoever. He makes like this sly joke on getting his house together, whatever. And then the book states, the men laugh and shot their arms out. The palms stretched flat, moving from chest up into the air in front of them in a sharp motion as they cried out two words. Bruno was still kind of transfixed by the fact that his father did not come and say hello. So he decided to take a little bit of a leap and go to his father's office. And Bruno presumed that his father's office when they were in Berlin was like off limits with no exceptions, and he believed that it was still the case in this new home. He was very cautious of going to his father's office. He knocks on the door and his father invites him in and asks him to sit down. In the room is different than any other room in this house. It has plush carpet and the walls are covered in mahogany shelves. There's large book windows and there's a massive oak desk. Kind of like this is the one room that care and consideration has been put in towards, whereas the other houses, they kind of still seem gray and voided. His father offers Bruno a handshake because he's not the type of man to give his son a hug. Yeah. His father then continues to tell him that, do you like it here in this new home? And Bruno says, no, I don't like it here. I think that you've made a mistake and I'd like to go home. And his father then states again that they will be here for the foreseeable future. Bruno's father then proceeds to kind of have like this semblance of a bonding moment, stating that when the father was a child, he had to just listen to his father's instructions and not have kind of like any recourse or pushback regarding it, and that was for the best cause of action. And Bruno's not having it. He's still upset. He still is definitely ready and eager to return to Berlin, to home, to his family, to a sense of normalcy. And his father eventually is just like, we're not leaving. This is going to be your home. And basically, you just need to get over it. Bruno is under the guise that Bruno's father did something wrong. And he asked him, did you make the Fury upset? Like, maybe you should apologize and he would give you a better job, because why would he give you this job? You must have done something wrong. After long, his father does not get a temper with his son. However, he kind of just point blank states, we're no longer talking about this. You can just go to your room. Like, we're done. And as Bruno has gotten up, heading to his room, he turns around and tells his father, like, I have one more question. His father thinks that this is still going to be like a rebuttal about moving back, and Bruno assures him that it's different, that it's not the same. And he asks him, who are those people outside? His father initially believes that he's talking about the soldiers. Like, who are the soldiers? He's like, you've seen soldiers before. And he's like, no, I'm not talking about, not them, the people I see from my window and the huts in the distance. They're all dressed the same. And his father responds, those people? Well, they're not people at all, Bruno. And then Bruno left his father's office, and his father's last words when Bruno leaves is Hail Hitler. A couple of days pass, and Bruno is laying on his bed. He's laying on his bed, looking up at the ceiling and just watching the chipped paint on the ceiling, kind of disliking his life currently. And Maria, the maid, she walks in to put Bruno's laundry away. Bruno kind of takes this upon himself as a point to make an allegiance with Maria. And he's stating, like, do you like it here in this house? I don't. And Maria at first is trying to dodge the question and not answer it. And she states that my feelings on the matter don't matter. And Bruno makes a statement that your family, of course they matter. Maria is touched by this, and this is the first time as Bruno is talking to Maria and understanding that Maria had a life. She had friends, she had family. They're not recluse to her job, that she has worked for his family. She has been a maid for them since Bruno was 3, and this is the first time him realizing that she is a fully whole person with other lives and dreams and goals and ambitions. Bruno at this time is still irritated and frustrated about his circumstances, and he states out loud that his father is stupid. Maria gets scared and she tells him, no, like, your father is a good man, like, don't say that. We get Maria's backstory. Maria's mother grew up with Bruno's father. Maria's mother worked for Bruno's grandmother when she was on tour. I think she was like a singer, and she was on tour, and so because of this family relationship, Bruno's father offered Maria a job. He helped for medical costs as well as funeral costs for Maria's mother. And she's basically saying that he's a good man. And she goes over to Bruno's window and she's looking out. And while she's looking out, she says, he was very kind to me then. He has a lot of kindness in his soul. He truly does, which makes me wonder. And before she can finish this sentence, they hear Maria and Bruno hear footsteps walking up the stairs. They kind of freeze in a state of frightened. They're both frightened and scared of like who's walking up the stairs, and who enters is Gretel. Gretel enters into the room and she's a little bit perturbed why Bruno and Maria are speaking to each other, and Gretel gives Maria the instructions to go run her bath. Bruno's kind of in the state of rebellion and asks Gretel, like, why can't you do it yourself? Maria's job isn't to do things that we're capable of doing. And Gretel just looks at him like, who are you talking to, essentially? Bruno is kind of overwhelmed. Gretel looks at him like he's crazy and tells him, like, keep your feelings to yourself. Bruno is contemplating wanting to run away. And he feels there's this time where these moments of that are very tense, and Maria and him both look like they're on like the verge of crying. And Maria tells him, we must all just keep ourselves safe until this is all over. And there's these elusive messages that are happening, but Bruno doesn't have any information to actually put them together. So instead of running away, he runs outside and just spends the day running up and down the driveway. Bruno is under the suspicion that he's going to go crazy, essentially. There was a man named Herr Roller, a man in Berlin who walked the streets and spoke to himself, and he felt as though if he did not find some way to constructively occupy his time, he would end up like that man. He realizes that on Gretel's side of the house, where there's like a forest, yeah. He realized that on Gretel's side of the house, there's a forest, a large oak tree, and a very large the tree has a white trunk where he can create a swing using a rope and tire. However, he needs to find a spare tire. He found the rope, and so he decides to ask Lieutenant Kotler, I'm going to call him Lieutenant K. I don't have time. Lieutenant Kotler for a tire. We're introduced to Lieutenant K on the first day that Bruno actually moved to out with, and she was upstairs helping Maria unpack all of his clothes. And this man with a very stern look, he had a very much disposition of coldness to him, walks by his room. He doesn't know why the soldier is in his house, but he feels very uneasy with him. And he goes up, he musters up the confidence to go ask Lieutenant K, does he have a tire? Lieutenant Kotler, or K, is actually speaking to Gretel at this time. Gretel is kind of like laughing very heartily at whatever he's saying, and Bruno goes and like basically interrupts their conversation. Gretel looks noticeably upset about this, but he asks Lieutenant K for, is there a spare tire? At first, the lieutenant is making like these sly jokes that are kind of going over Bruno's head. Like, he states that the last spare tire I saw was around the waist of Lieutenant Hoffenschneider's, and Bruno doesn't get the joke. And Gretel just laughs at him, kind of belittling him for his ignorance of the joke that the lieutenant just made, I guess. Bruno, because of this, of course, gets upset about his sister's behavior and basically just states that you're only 12, you don't know everything. And Gretel is very kind of upset that he has said something to her in front of Lieutenant K. And they're having this conversation when a man named Pavel is walking down the street towards their house. Every day he comes to cut vegetables and produce for the family for dinner. And Lieutenant K comes, basically calls him a slur and gets his attention. He instructs him to take Bruno to the shed so that Bruno can pick out a spare tire, and Pavel is instructed to carry the tire wherever Bruno tells him to. So that's what they do. They go to the shed, Bruno and Pavel, and he picks out the tire that he wants, and then he gets back home. He goes back home and he decides to make a swing. After he made the swing and he's swinging, he fell downward, one foot still inside the rim, while he landed face down on the ground beneath him with a thud. And then when basically Bruno was going to get off of the ground, the swing came back and hit him in his head. Pavel, he was in the house cutting up the vegetables after Bruno had made the swing, and basically told him that you were swinging too high and that's why this has happened to you. He scoops Bruno up and takes him into the kitchen to handle his minor injuries. I think he's like scratched his knee. And Bruno is under the impression that he is going to bleed out. And Pavel's telling him like, no, you'll be okay. And bandages him up like, you'll be fine. And Bruno makes the statement that, how do you know I'm going to be okay? Like, I could die. I might need to go to the hospital. You're not a doctor. And Pavel says, yeah, I am a doctor. And Bruno's confused, like, if you're a doctor, why aren't you being a doctor? Why are you cutting vegetables for us? Pavel kind of explains to him, I used to be a doctor before, but now I cut vegetables. So Bruno is confused why Pavel is cutting vegetables and not being a doctor if he's a doctor. Eventually, his mother comes in and basically Bruno explains to him what happened, that he fell off a tree, and that Pavel has come to help and assist him with his wounds. His mother tells him, like, okay, cool, go upstairs to your room. As Bruno is walking upstairs, he hears his mother and Pavel in the kitchen speaking, and his mother tells Pavel, if the commandant or my husband ever ask what happened, just tell him that I'm the one who cleaned up Bruno's wounds. As a bit of a flashback, since moving to this new home, Bruno has not seen his grandparents, and he misses his grandparents a lot. In his mind, his grandfather was the oldest person on earth, and his mother never seemed old in comparison to other grandmothers. On holidays, he remembered his grandmother, Gretel, and himself would come up and dress up and perform these productions for the family. And Bruno, in these productions, was just excited to be included in them. He remembers back a couple of Christmases ago when changes started happening. The first one was that everyone in the house had to now call Bruno's father the commandant. So that was Maria, the cook, Lars, who was the butler. His name changed. And then two, the Fury and this beautiful woman came to dinner, which kind of brought the house to a standstill. Bruno also at this time was instructed to congratulate his father on this new position, but Bruno was still very much so unclear, what is this new position and what does our father do? One Christmas, his father showed his family, which is his immediate family and his mother and father, the grandparents of Bruno, his new uniform. Everybody was awed and impressed except the grandmother. The grandmother's distaste for the uniform could not be reduced or quieted. The grandfather tries to make this comment to the grandmother of, I think the grandmother's name is Elizabeth, I believe. Makes this comment towards the grandma that we talked about this, like you wouldn't make basically a scene. And she says, no, you talked about this, not I. You know what I mean? She said no. And she states, standing there in your uniform, she continued, as if it makes you something special, not even caring what it really means, what it stands for. Bruno at this time is right after the family or his grandmother and his sister did a production, and he has his uniform on and he asks his family, like, do you like my uniform? All of the adults, while they're having this conversation and this discourse about the father's new uniform, had forgotten that the children were in the room. They were instructed to go upstairs. The children eventually go upstairs. There's more heated debates and topics, and then the grandmother just storms out of the house. And after that, Bruno did not see his grandmother that much at all, very much. And he was kind of upset that he wasn't able to say goodbye before they moved to their new home. This part of the book ends with Bruno making a decision that he is going to write a letter to his grandmother and just telling her everything that's happening at OW and about the people in the backyard. And the people in the backyard specifically all wear the same clothes, which are striped pajamas. After some time, Bruno's father decided that the children are ready to start their schooling again. A man named Hurst List came and he taught history and geography. Bruno was very much more interested in reading and art, and he didn't at first really enjoy or like the schooling that he was being taught. Her List, I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation, but he taught both Gretel and Bruno, and he never yelled at Bruno. However, there was this subtle anger behind his eyes, and he told Bruno that he needed to learn his family's history and that Bruno needed to learn about real events, not just made up stories in the books that he liked to read. Over the course of learning, Bruno reminded himself or remembered that he wanted to be an explorer. That is something that he wanted to do and that he should start embarking on those adventures. After looking outside to the enclosed city behind the fence, he wanted to know more about the people who lived there and why they all wore the same things. He kind of deduced to that there was nothing to explore inside the house, so he got himself ready to go outside and adventure. Outside, first he went to venture towards the park bench that was facing the house near the garden. He went there and he read the plaque, and the plaque said, "Presented on the occasion of the opening of Out With Camp." Bruno's confused, but he proceeded to venture on beyond the bench. He kept walking, and he knew that he was not supposed to go near the fence that was in his backyard, technically. However, he still went. Bruno started walking towards the fence, and the house that he resided became smaller and smaller. He became a little bit hungry and was tempted to turn around, but he didn't. He proceeded forward, and then he saw a dot that turned into a speck, that turned into a blob, that turned into a figure, and it was actually a person. It was a boy. In the mind of his explorer, his exploration, he knew that he should be cautious of strangers. But regardless, Bruno said hello, and the boy in the striped pajamas said hello back. He was wearing striped pajamas. His skin was gray. His eyes were caramel. The boy looked sad and skinny. Bruno introduces himself as an explorer. The boy asks, have you found anything? And Bruno says, I found you. And then Bruno introduces himself and he asked, who are you? Bruno introduces himself and he informs him that he lives on this side of the fence in that house in the background. The boy introduces himself as Shmuel. I think that's a pronunciation. I think it's Shmuel. I think it's the correct pronunciation. I'm sorry if I butcher it. Both to Bruno and to Shmuel, the pronunciation of the boy's name sounds weird. It's strange and it's foreign to him. Shmuel explains that a lot of boys on this side of the fence have that name, and both Shmuel and Bruno also speak about their birthdays, and they realize that they were born on the same day, April 15th of 1934, and Bruno is very shocked by this realization. Bruno asks Shmuel, does he have any friends? Shmuel says, yes, kind of. Bruno's a little bit hurt by this because he's under the guise of that if he doesn't have any friends on this side of the fence, so that if Shmuel didn't have any friends, they could be friends together, but he didn't want to be kind of the only one with no friends. He didn't want to admit that. The two boys begin to talk. Bruno explains that he's from Berlin. Shmuel explains that he's from Poland, and Shmuel knows many languages. Bruno states that he's never met any children that have known multiple languages and finds this very interesting. Bruno then goes on a diatribe of explaining that Germany is the best country of all countries, and Shmuel just looks at him and says nothing. Shmuel explains that he is from Poland and that this is the country that they're in, that both Shmuel and Bruno live and reside in Poland, and that there are other places in Poland that are more beautiful than this, and from where he's from. They both kind of agree to disagree on which country is better, either Germany or Poland. Bruno then proceeds to ask Shmuel why there's so many people on that side of the fence, and Shmuel doesn't really give him a solidified answer. So now we're in the book, we're kind of taken back to a little bit of a flashback with the father coming home one day and stating to the family, if you have any plans for Thursday, you need to cancel them. Bruno's mother is if you want to cancel your plans, that's fine, but I already have plans. And Bruno's father basically explains to the whole family that the Fury has invited himself to dinner and that he has big plans for us, so we need to get prepared. The mother goes into kind of a state of over exuberance where she's cleaning baseboards, cleaning the house from top to bottom, and all preparation for this one dinner that will be happening on Thursday night. The mother in this book also kind of like makes these sly comments that, you know, preparation for Thursday night's dinner would go more smoothly if other people would help out. And on Thursday, before the dinner, Bruno and Gretel are they are called to their father's office. They both are sitting down, and he is explaining to them that, one, they are not to speak unless being spoken to first. Two, the children are instructed to speak clearly and enunciate, similar to what adults do, and then they are dismissed from their father's office. Around 30 minutes later, the doorbell rings, and the whole staff, the whole family, kind of line up in this procession to welcome their guest. And at the front door, there is a small man and a taller woman at the front door. The man has dark hair, shorter than father, and a very small mustache that confused Bruno, because it was just like this block of a mustache, and Bruno was just like, why don't you just shave it all off? Like, why do you have like a quarter of a mustache? And there's a beautiful woman with blonde hair. Her name is Eva, and she shows the kids very much kindness and gratitude. And the children are both introduced. The father states, this is Gretel and this is Bruno, and the Fury, the man, just makes a rebuttal of, so which one's which? Bruno doesn't get the joke, and he's just like, it's very clear which one's Gretel and which one is Bruno. He doesn't find it funny at all, and Gretel states that she knows French as a way of trying to impress the new guests. And the Fury says, why would you want to speak that language? The line of questioning causes a change of energy in the room, and they kind of all stand for silence. Then the adults, primarily the mother, father, and the Fury, walk into the dining room about to have dinner, while Eva stays back and speaks to the kids kindly. She tells Gretel that, you know, I know French as well, and that's a lovely language to learn. And the children eventually are being sent to the room to be silent. They have not been invited to dinner, and they should not be heard while dinner is being served. Later on that evening, Bruno hears his father and mother like fighting throughout the night. They're fighting now that we know is that they're fighting that they have to leave Berlin. And then a few weeks later, Bruno found Maria in his room packing up his items to leave and touching things again that were no one else's business. So back into the budding friendship of Bruno and Shmuel. Shmuel is specifically thinking of answers to Bruno's questions, and he explains to Bruno kind of his background and his life story. One, he is a part of a family of 4, and they lived with his mother, father, and brother in an apartment over his father's watch shop. Shmuel states that he had a watch that was given to him by his father that was taken away by soldiers, and Bruno doesn't understand how like somebody could take something away that belonged to you. That line of processing doesn't land in Bruno's mind. And Shmuel goes on to explain that things changed. First, his mother would create these Star of David patches that everybody would have to wear when they left the house. Bruno interjected that his father wears an armband, and he drew a picture of the armband that his father has in the sand, and that he wanted an armband like him as well. Shmuel kind of like just shakes his head and continues on his story, also kind of stating that I never asked for an armband. I never asked to wear one. And Shmuel also makes a statement that he doesn't typically care to think of the past because it makes him sad. Shmuel goes on to state that eventually they had to move. They had to move, and his whole family was living in a room with 11 people. And Bruno's just like, how in the world can 11 people live in one room? And he's like, Bruno doesn't believe him. And Shmuel's like, I lived it. It happened. Shmuel goes on to state that there was other boys who he lived with that used to bully him and pick on him, and that it was very sad because he knew that his home was on the other side of a wall, his real home. And then one day, huge trucks trucks came and rounded everyone up, and they were taken to these trains. On the trains, it was packed and they couldn't breathe, and they had to walk to camps, and his mother was taken away from him. Bruno's kind of like in the state of shock that, oh yeah, like I was at the train station and there was so much room in my cabin. I think that you guys just shouldn't have all tried to cram into one cabin. Shmuel tries to gently explain to him, I don't think that we were allowed to go on to another train or another cabin. Like we had to go into the train that we were assigned to. And Bruno, again, isn't getting it. Anyway, so after Bruno is listening to Shmuel's story of kind of how he came to this camp, he doesn't understand why the story makes Shmuel so sad. He also feels as though his story of being displaced from his original home with Shmuel is very similar. Like he had to leave Berlin and that was unfair, and it's very similar to the things that Shmuel had to go through. He also states that he is a little upset and I guess a jealous to a certain extent, that he believes that Shmuel has children to play with. He has children to play with on his side of the fence, and Bruno has no one to play with, and he's upset by that. Shmuel tries to reiterate the fact to Bruno that children on this side of the fence, we don't play, like that's not something that we do, and Bruno still isn't. He's not understanding. Shmuel asks Bruno, does he have any food? And Bruno says, no, I don't have any food, but I wanted to bring chocolate. And Shmuel's like, I've only ever had chocolate once in my life. Shmuel states that he is about to leave and go back to where his home, where he's supposed to be. And Bruno tries to invite Shmuel to dinner, and Shmuel's like, you don't understand. And Bruno's like, well, I can climb underneath the fence and hang out with you on your side, but that doesn't happen. At the end of this encounter, Shmuel is walking away and Bruno is noticing how small he was. They're literally the same age to the day. Bruno says that he will return tomorrow and also makes the decision that this little encounter or this new friendship that he has made, he is going to keep it to himself just so that nobody else can spoil this relationship. After several weeks, Bruno finally comes to the realization that he will not be returning to Berlin and the foreseeable future is more of a permanent state. He does try to ask Maria some questions. He asks Maria questions about He proceeds to ask Maria some questions about Pavel, speaking like, is he a doctor? And Maria states like, no, he isn't a doctor. He was a doctor previously. Bruno doesn't understand like, why isn't he a doctor now if he was a doctor previously? Maria then goes to tell Bruno about Pavel's life story. We don't really get any information regarding that, and we are skipped back to when Bruno and Shmuel are by the fence and they're speaking. Bruno brings up the conversation that he had with Maria about Pavel, and that Pavel is from this side of the fence, and Bruno's asking Shmuel like, do you know Pavel? And Shmuel's like, I don't know him. And Bruno's at first like not believing him, like, how do you not know him? He lives on this side. And Shmuel is making the statement, you don't understand like how many people live on this side of the fence. There's thousands of us, and many of us are from Poland. Bruno kind of just leaves it at that. They move on to the next conversation of what do you want to be when you grow up. Shmuel states that when he grows up, he wants to work at a zoo. Bruno states that he wants to be like his father, a soldier. Shmuel states that there are no good soldiers. And Bruno's just like, well, except my father. And that just like leads to an awkward silence. The boys just stop talking. And Shmuel says, you don't know what it's like to live here. And Bruno says, well, Shmuel, you're lucky because you don't have sisters. I have a sister and she's a hopeless case. Eventually, they bring up Lieutenant Nottler in conversation, and they both kind of come to the consensus that he makes them feel scared, uneasy, a little trepidated. When Bruno eventually makes it back home, he realizes that Lieutenant Nottler has joined them for dinner. And Pavel is the person who comes every day to cut vegetables and produce, but he's also the person who serves them their dinner. And he's serving dinner, but It looks like he's sleeping with his eyes open. Like he's there, but not. He's frail. He's got weaker and smaller each week. And at this time, he's not very good at like hearing commands. So he's forgetting to fill wine glasses or to respond when someone wants more soup, things of that nature. At this dinner, the conversation regarding history comes up, and Bruno states that he hates history. His father's upset by Bruno's temperament and states that correcting history is what we're doing at Outwith and that you should like history. Gretel is sitting down and she is trying to get the attention of Lieutenant Nottler, basically laughing at his jokes, trying to engage with him, and Gretel's mother, Bruno's mother, also notices this, and she gives her daughter kind of like this strange look on like why this 12-year-old is trying to get this Lieutenant Nottler is 17, I believe, his attention. This adds on to a conversation between Lieutenant Nottler and the father. Lieutenant Nottler is explaining that he had a father that he doesn't speak to who moved to Switzerland. The Bruno's father is kind of like, why would your father leave Germany at its most precious time when it needed all of its resources and assistance as much as possible? Lieutenant Nottler is being very vague and trying not to kind of implicate himself, really solidify himself as an allegiance towards the German cause. After this conversation, or during this conversation, the father asks Pavel for more wine. His cup has gone empty, and Pavel goes over to pour the father more wine. The father asks, like, what's wrong with you? Like, I've had to ask you for wine several times. And then during this process, Pavel loses his grip on the wine bottle and he spills the contents of the bottle in Lieutenant Nottler's lap. This results to everybody being stunned with the actions that Lieutenant Nottler takes. We are not privy to specifically what happens. However, we know that it is probably egregious. And after this point, we never hear about Pavel again. Bruno is sad that his father did not interfere. During this process and during this dinner, because of all of these events that are happening, life in Berlin starts to seem further and further away. Additional weeks pass, and Bruno is still not understanding why he is not able to venture to the other side of the fence, why the people on the other side of the fence are wearing all the same striped pajamas, and the last time he sees Shmuel, he has a black eye, and he's trying to figure out, like, how did you get this black eye? Over the course of the next several days, it's very raining, and it prevents Bruno from going outside. So he's cramped up in his room, and the hopeless case, his sister Gretel, enters his room, and she states that she hates the rain. At first, Bruno is going to give her a difficult time, very similar to how difficult time that she gives him, but he decides to be civil and says, yes, I hate the rain too. I should be with Shmuel right now. He'll think I've forgotten him. Bruno is upset immediately that he spilled these words and these contents out, and he tries to kind of dodge and avoid like he didn't say anything. Gretel's just like, who are you talking about? What did you just say? Who's waiting for you? Who are you trying to hang out with? And Bruno is trying to lie, but it's not going well. So he decides to come up with a more reasonable lie. He states that I do have a friend. He's an imaginary friend. And Gretel teases him. She teases him because she states, aren't you a little bit too old to have an imaginary friend? And one of the characteristics that we get in the book is that Gretel recently has just turned 13, and she feels as though sarcasm is the highest level of sophistication. Eventually, Gretel does believe the lie that Bruno tells, that he has an imaginary friend, and kind of lets it go. She states that you probably don't want a father to know that you have an imaginary friend, because that would probably be big trouble for you, but she promises not to tell anybody. But during this conversation, Bruno does realize that he does want to tell or talk to somebody about Shmuel, and this is the perfect guys to kind of tell someone, specifically his sister, about his new friend without disclosing the truth of the matter. He tells Gretel about Shmuel and his family that was in the watch business, and that Shmuel had a grandfather who disappeared for a few days, and every time Shmuel asked his father, like, where did grandfather go, his father just wouldn't answer and would just hug him like super tightly. As Bruno is recounting these stories, he's kind of realizing how sad these stories must be for Shmuel, and that when Shmuel was giving him this information or telling him these stories, he just quickly changed the subject to exploration, about exploring different worlds, and that the next time he sees him, he will apologize to him for being very like crass and not listening to him. Eventually, Gretel leaves with this information, basically telling him to let go of his imaginary friend, or he'll probably get in trouble. So the next event is Bruno's father's birthday. We'll kind of call him the commandant, because calling him Bruno's father is like, girl. The commandant's birthday is coming up, and the mother has decided that she's going to throw a party for her husband. And this party, the father has gone off, not at the house any longer. He has gone off to do business elsewhere, and Lieutenant Nottler, one of his more common traits is that he walks around the house as if he owns it. And Bruno, he is inside the house today, and he has a book called Treasure Island, and he is intending to go to the living room and read his book. He's headed downstairs towards the living room when Lieutenant Nottler basically gets in his way, and he's just like, hey, little man, like, what are you doing? Note 1, Bruno does not like this man for several reasons. So Bruno does not like the lieutenant for several reasons. One of the reasons that, 1, he's scared of him, but he also finds him very much annoying. 2, he never smiles. 3, he calls Bruno a little man, which feels very belittling and very irritating to him. 4, he's always in the living room, like making jokes that makes his mother like laugh super loudly, like more loudly than she laughs at father's jokes. And 5, one time a dog was barking near the fence and he shot the dog for barking. And then 6, the incident that happened at dinner with Pavel are all the reasons why Bruno does not like Lieutenant. And Lieutenant is kind of making fun with him. He takes the book out of his hand and it's like, oh, what are you reading? And like, what is your book about? And Bruno, in a very smart aleck way, says, well, it's about an island and there's a treasure on it. And Lieutenant Nottler is like, okay, I could guess what that's about. Like, what else is about? And so Lieutenant Nottler is also baiting him, stating like, well, your father's birthday's coming up. Are you going to be on your best behavior? And Bruno's just like, I will. I can't say the same for you, though. And it's like this debate, this banter, because Bruno's under the opinion that my mother and my father can tell me what to do. However, not you. Not you whatsoever. They're kind of having this back and forth debate, and Bruno's mother comes into the living room and she sees Lieutenant Nottler at first. And she says, oh, Kurt, precious, you're still here. If I have a little free time now, Bruno's mother eventually realizes that he's actually still in the room and tells him to go to the kitchen because she needs to speak with Lieutenant Nottler alone. Bruno goes to the kitchen and he sees Shmuel in the kitchen cleaning glasses. He has been instructed to come and clean glass. It's because he has small hands that can actually like fit into the glass. The two boys kind of held their hands out, kind of comparing, and Bruno realizes that Shmuel's hands are so much smaller than his. And they're both kind of excited and happy to see each other. Bruno goes over to the refrigerator and just like absentmindedly picks up some like leftover chicken from lunch. And he's eating and he notices that Shmuel is looking at the food and he offers him some food, and Shmuel's like, no, I can't eat because if Lieutenant Nottler comes back, that will be very bad. If Lieutenant Nottler comes back and I've eaten food, I'll get in trouble. And so after some prying, and honestly, the most definition of peer pressure, Shmuel eats food. As soon as he's done swallowing, Lieutenant Nottler walks back into the kitchen and he asks Shmuel, like, why are you talking to Bruno? I never gave you instructions to basically speak in this house. He walks over to him and then proceeds to ask, like, have you been eating food? Shmuel says, like, Bruno gave it to me, essentially. And it's this very intense moment where both of the boys are very scared, afraid of Lieutenant Nottler. And Lieutenant Nottler turns to Bruno and asks him, do you know this boy? Because Shmuel has stated that Shmuel and Bruno. Lieutenant Nottler is grilling Shmuel, and he is stating that, Bruno is my friend and he gave me some chicken. And Lieutenant Nottler is upset. He turns to Bruno and asks, like, do you know him? Like, do you know this boy? And Bruno states that I've never seen him before today. Bruno states that he's never seen this boy before today. And Lieutenant Nottler turns around back to Shmuel and states, you're going to stay here and you're going to finish cleaning these glasses. I'm going to come back and collect you, and then we're going to have a conversation on what we do with little boys who steal. Weeks have gone by where he has not seen Shmuel at all, and eventually the boys meet back again, and Shmuel is bruised and beaten, and Bruno apologizes multiple times profusely that he's sorry and he's ashamed of himself. Bruno asks Shmuel, like, who beat you up? What happened? Does it hurt? And Shmuel makes a statement that I don't feel anything anymore. Bruno then proceeds to apologize again. Shmuel, lifts up the fence and the boys shake hands. And this is the first time that they've ever touched. And there's this point in this book where Bruno is not able, even though he's not able to correlate his actions with indirect consequences. And that is frustrating. Not that it's his fault that Shmuel got beat or bruised, because he didn't beat him or bruise him, but that his actions and his lies, they all have consequences. But yeah. At this point in the book, a year has gone by, and this is their family's first trip back to Berlin. They're going back to Berlin because the grandmother has passed away. At this funeral, a wreath from the Fury comes as a sign of condolences for the grandmother's passing, and Bruno's mother makes a comment that the grandmother would have hated to have gotten a wreath from the Fury. Thoroughly hated. And while in Berlin, in this house, he notices how much he's grown, that he's gotten a little taller, that he can look over certain things that he wasn't able to look over before. And he misses his home back in Outwith, is essentially. Also, in this time, he knows that he should be happy and excited because Lieutenant Nottler has been moved. He has been transferred and he will never come back. One late night, he heard father and mother arguing late night, and Gretel was kind of inconsolable due to Lieutenant Nottler's passing or leaving. When Bruno gets back to the new house, old house, I don't know, he meets up with Shmuel and states that their friendship is a little bit strange because they have hung out for well over almost a year, but they've never been able to actually play together. And also Bruno has this habit of stating that they've never seen each other beyond this fence. And Bruno likes to pretend that the events that happened in that kitchen that day had never happened because it's not savory, and Shmuel kind of gives him the grace to pretend that it never occurred. Back in his house, Bruno goes searching for additional answers to questions. He goes to Gretel. At this point, Gretel is more reserved. She has no more dolls in her room. She has maps and pins where she's pinning things on maps in her room for some reason. Bruno goes to Gretel and asks her, what's going on with the fence? Why are they trying to keep us out of something? And Gretel kind of instructs him, they're not trying to keep you out of something, they're trying to keep something in. You're not being restricted. And she explains that everyone who is behind the fence are Jews. And he's not in, like, Bruno, this word is new for him. And he can't understand, like, Jews. Like, okay, if they're Jews, he asks Gretel, like, then what are we? Gretel doesn't really fully know how to answer that question, but she's just saying, we're just not Jews. And Bruno is continuously asking repeated questions, trying to understand, but he's still not getting any full answers. And it is interrupted by Gretel screaming at the top of her voice. She's screaming this large scream because she has found an egg, a small egg, in her hair. The mother comes into the room and realizes that both her children, Gretel and Bruno, have lice. Gretel has to get her hair washed with this special shampoo, and the father has concluded that for Bruno, the best thing would be just to shave off his whole head and to start over. Bruno gets his hair shaven and he's a bit embarrassed by this, and when he looks in the mirror, he's like, I look like Shmuel. Eventually later, he goes and sees Shmuel at the fence, and Shmuel is laughing at him. He's laughing at him, and Bruno says, I look just like you now. Bruno said sadly, as if it was a terrible thing to admit. Only fatter, admitted Shmuel. Now we are transfixed back to the mother, giving you a little bit of tidbits of things that are happening in the book that come up at this point. The mother has spent most of her days, she has taken a lot of afternoon naps, and she takes a lot of trips away from the home, and she has a lot of medicinal sherries. She's very sad. She's very sad and not happy. Bruno has overheard his parents having a conversation, and Bruno's mother is making a statement that this is no place to raise children, and that the children and the mother should move back home. The father is basically stating that, well, he can't leave. The Fuhrer will not allow him to leave his post. And how will it look if his whole family leaves, goes back to Berlin while he's still out here? It just wouldn't look good for rapport. Bruno, at this point, he is trying to grow up a little bit, and he is stating that he will be okay with whatever decision is made and he will accept it. Again, Gretel and Bruno are invited into their father's office, and they're having a conversation on whether the children want to move back home. Gretel is like, yes, I would like to go back to Berlin. Bruno is more of, I would like the family to stay together, whether it's Berlin or whether it's in Poland, like whatever. I'd rather stay with the whole family. And they're having this conversation, and Bruno makes a remark stating that, well, there are lots of children here. I think a conversation comes up of there's no children for the commanded children to hang out with or play with. And Bruno states, well, there's a lot of children here. And the father and Gretel both look at him kind of in this very strange way. He makes a rebuttal after that, well, there's a lot of children behind the fence and in striped pajamas. And his father's just like, how can you see that? He explains that he can see them from his window, and that is kind of the seal that his father makes that, yes, it is time for both Gretel and Bruno to go back to Berlin, to go back to a community with children, and that is not here. Eventually, nothing changes instantaneously, and Bruno is kind of scared to tell Shmuel that he's leaving, that he's going back to Berlin, and he has to wait 3 days before he can see Shmuel again. And the next time Bruno comes to the fence, Shmuel looks sadder than usual. He said that his father has gone on a work detail and has not returned. Bruno is trying to offer him some sort of empathy and states that, the father, he might have had to finish his job, and once he finished his job, he will return back home. And Shmuel states that, I keep on looking for him, but I can't find him. Bruno makes a comment, well, you should just ask the soldiers. Shmuel is trying to explain that the soldiers don't like him. They don't like any of them. They actually hate them. And Shmuel states that's fine with me because I hate them too. Bruno's still not understanding why you can't ask the soldiers, and Bruno offers, well, I can go and ask my father if you would like. Shmuel says, I don't think that would be the best idea. I don't think we should do that. The conversation then shifts, and Bruno explains that he's going to be leaving basically Poland, this home, forever and going back to Berlin, and that tomorrow will be their last day together. And Shmuel is noticeably sad and disappointed about Bruno's departure. As the two boys are talking, Bruno makes a statement that he wants to see Shmuel's home. And Shmuel's basically telling him, like, you wouldn't like it, you wouldn't enjoy it, it's not something that you would like to see here. But Bruno is determined to kind of explore, and for at least for one day, for the two boys to be able to play and hang out on the same side of the fence. And Shmuel reluctantly lifts up the fence and states that, Bruno can just crawl under because it's not secure. And Bruno says, no, he says, no, I don't want to do that at all. But then Bruno recounts with, why don't I, since I have my hair shaven because I had my hair shaven off because I had lice, what you can do is bring me a pair of striped pajamas because I look like you. And then I can just put those on, and then I will be in disguise and nobody will find out. And so Shmuel lights up and says, yes, and maybe you can help me look for my father. And Bruno's like, yeah, I'll definitely help you. I'll come tomorrow and look for your father. Bruno and Shmuel leave and go their own ways, with Bruno stating, telling Shmuel, don't be late tomorrow. The next day, the beginning of the day, was filled with rain. Bruno and Shmuel typically go and see each other in the evening, or in the afternoon specifically. And the first part of the day is filled with rain, and Bruno is scared that he's not going to be able to go outside. Eventually, the rain clears. However, the ground is muddied, it's dirty, there's dirt, and Bruno leaves. Shmuel asks Bruno again once both boys meet at the fence if he's going to help him find his father. Bruno says yes. He hands him over the striped pajamas, and Bruno is realizing that when he goes home, his clothes are going to be dirty. They're going to have a lot of mud on it. But he's just like, I can just chop it up to boys will be boys and I won't get into too much trouble. He changes his clothes, and Shmuel holds up the fence and he crawls underneath the fence. In Bruno's idea, he feels as though behind the fence there will be huts and elders and rocking chairs and children respecting their elders. There will be a sense of community behind this. However, there was none of that. There was men with shaven hair that just sat in groups looking. They were very skinny and sad. And Bruno states to Shmuel, I don't like it here. Shmuel states, neither do I. The boys go on. Well, Bruno is tempted to double back and state, I can't help you find your father. I want to go home. And Shmuel's just like, you promised that you would help. Simply because Shmuel knows that if Bruno doesn't help, who will? Nobody else is going to try to help him find his father. So the two boys are going around camp trying to look for clues, but they find none. Shmuel is not surprised by this discovery and not necessarily disappointed. And it is getting late, and Bruno's like, the sun's going down, I want to go home. And then there's a whistle that blows. And Shmuel's explaining that sometimes the soldiers have people do marches. Bruno asks, do the marches last long? Shmuel explains, I've never seen the people after they've gone on a march, but I wouldn't imagine it does. Shmuel are kind of in the center of this group of men and children being pushed into this room. It is raining outside at this point, and they're being pushed into a long room. And Bruno at first is excited. He's just like, okay, cool. We are actually inside of a building and we won't be outside in the rain. And Bruno then again goes to Shmuel and explains and apologizes. I'm sorry. We weren't able to find your father or find any clues. And he holds his friend's hand and says, you know what? You're my best friend, and we are best friends for life. Shmuel says something, but Bruno doesn't hear it. I'm going to read you the suspect. So after he says that you're my best friend, and then in the book it states, Shmuel may have opened his mouth to say something back, but Bruno never heard it, because at that moment there was a loud gasp from all the marchers who had filled the room, as the door at the front was suddenly closed and a loud metallic sound rang through from the outside. Bruno raised his eyebrows, unable to understand the sense of all of this, but he assumed that it had something to do with the keeping the rain out and stopping the people from catching colds. And then the room went very dark, and somehow, despite the chaos that followed, Bruno found that he was still holding Shmuel's hand in his own, and nothing in the world would have persuaded him to let it go. Moving on to the last chapter. Bruno, after this event, was never heard from again. They searched for the boy. They didn't find him. The mother, who was supposed to leave for Berlin the following day, stayed for a few months just looking for clues until she kind of persuaded herself that Bruno may have found his way to Berlin. So she went to the Berlin home, kind of expecting him to be on the front steps waiting for her, and he wasn't there. The father, the commandant, stayed in Poland at his post, waiting and trying to understand what happened to his son. They did eventually find the boy's clothes, but initially it did not provide any clarity on where the boy had went. It just kind of felt like he had vanished one day. The father spent days and nights thinking about trying to understand what happened to his son, and so he ventured back out to where the clothes were found, and he realized that the fence in that area was not secured fully to the ground, and that it lifted up just enough for that a small boy, similar to the size of Bruno, who could fit underneath it. Eventually, soldiers at this campsite, at this concentration camp, stopped caring for the commandant because he was harsh and abrasive to them, and eventually soldiers came and took the commandant, or Bruno's father, away. And the end of the book ends with this quote. And that's the end of the story of Bruno and his family. Of course, all of this happened a long time ago, and nothing like that could ever happen again. Not in this day and age. And that is the book of The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. That was a very sad book. And yeah. Thank you for watching. And guess what? I'll see you next time.